Welcome to this session. I hope that you've been getting a lot of great programming today throughout today's NewsLitCamp. I'm extremely excited to bring you this upcoming session on inclusive journalism. When I first started as a journalist, when I looked at it as a career choice, I thought it would be a great opportunity to use my experiences and background and use them in a way to to honor communities that have felt marginalized by the media. So I'm thrilled to be joined by by a panel of journalists who are also passionate about serving their communities and helping repair relationships with people who have felt harmed by the media. I'm Demario Phibbs-Smith. I'm a journalist and the Senior Manager of Community Learning at the News Literacy Project, and I'll be your host throughout this session as we dive into the efforts to make journalism more inclusive. But before I introduce our amazing panelists for this session, I'd like to start with a few housekeeping notes. So yes, all of these sessions will be recorded and will be shared following the NewsLitCamp. You can request a certificate of attendance through the feedback survey, which will be available at the end of the session. And copies of the presentation, as well as all the resources that will be mentioned here, will be shared in an email next week. And of course, all of our resources are free, and we encourage you to share with your friends and family and network. When using the chat, please use the chat feature, the chat button on your webinar platform to send general discussions to other attendees to talk about, potential classroom applications of what we're talking about. And I would implore you to use the Q&A function to ask questions about webinar content. We'll have a brief period toward the end of the session where we'll open up to questions from the audience. Thank you. So without further ado, it is my privilege and honor to welcome our amazing panelists to the session, starting first with Marcus Riley, who is a Senior Director of Local News Strategy and Inclusive Journalism for the Scripps Company. He works with local news corporate teams to implement, evaluate, and measure and refine Scripps local news content. He's currently working with stations implementing the neighborhood strategy as part of the company's new news initiative. Marcus also works with Scripps local news stations on equity, diversity, and inclusion systems, including training and audience research. Thank you for joining us. Next, Micah Smith, who joined KMGH TV in Denver in 2018 as a morning news reporter and is Denver 7's social equity reporter. Before coming to Colorado, Micah worked as a reporter and weekend anchor at WBT News in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she reported on stories that gained nationwide attention, including the death of Reverend Billy Graham and Hurricane Florence. Thank you for joining us, Micah. Next, we have Nathaniel Reed, who is the congressional correspondent based out of the U.S. Capitol and Scripps News, Washington, D.C. Bureau. He covers the day-to-day work of the U.S. Senate, House of Representatives, and high-profile congressional campaigns across the country. Nathaniel joined Scripps in February 2020 from NBC5 News. Thank you so much for joining us as well, Nathaniel. And then finally, we have Andres Shapiro, who is the Vice President and General Manager of WSFL, Scripps CW affiliate in Miami. He joined Scripps in 2021 as the Vice President and General Manager of KXXV and KRHD, the Scripps affiliates in Waco, Temple, and Bryan, Texas markets. And prior to that, he was the president and general manager of KDEN, the Telemundo station in Denver. Thank you for joining us, Andres. Everybody, thank you so much for taking this time to speak with us about the efforts that are happening in journalism to improve inclusivity. And so I guess I talked a little bit about your titles, right? But I would love to know more about the work that you all do and what influences that? What motivates you to build more inclusivity in journalism systems? We'll start with Marcus and then move to Micah from there.
Yeah, thanks for the intro and for having us on here today. You know, when we were talking about this program, one of the organizers asked me why I do what I do, and I've actually been thinking about about that this morning, and I think it's because I used to be part of the problem. The first 8 years of my career, I was a TV reporter, and I covered a lot of crime as a 11P night side reporter. I was very much a part of that if it bleeds, it leads kind of culture, without having a full understanding of how that was resonating with the communities that I covered. So in my current role, I help our local newsrooms establish systems and processes to help ensure that the product that they produce on a daily basis is representative of the communities that they serve. And while that may sound simple on the surface, there's a lot involved with that. And first of all, I know we'll get into it a bit throughout this session, but our industry has not traditionally been representative of their audiences, especially when it comes to marginalized and underserved communities. And we still have a long way to go. That representation matters when it comes to the people who you physically see on air, but perhaps more importantly, the people behind the scenes, and especially management, the ones making the final coverage decisions. And that's important because facts may be facts when it comes to news coverage, but there are biases that enter the equation. And those biases, which are often unconscious, those are the things that can get in the way of making sound decisions that are inclusive of those communities that we serve. So we need to make sure that our newsrooms have the tools necessary to identify when this is happening. And I help with that training process in my role. It can be as simple as making sure that we have an environment that allows people the freedom to ask difficult questions of each other without fear of being judged or feeling that their opinions or experiences won't be valued. And I think it's important to look at society as a whole, that has become more and more polarized, and to make sure that our newsrooms are free of that polarization. And not to say that some healthy debate isn't necessary to get to the truth. And the truth is that all perspectives matter. We need Black and brown people, older and younger people, rural and urban people, people with different socioeconomic backgrounds and upbringings. We need all of those people to bring their voices to the table, because their perspectives matter too, both in the makeup of the newsroom and with all of the people that we speak to in the community for our stories.
That's excellent. That's awesome. No, being able to get your news from diverse sources is also thinking about the different types of people that you get news from as well. So that's a big principle in news literacy, is diversifying your news sources and thinking about where you're getting news from. So thank you for touching on that. Micah, do you mind unmuting yourself and sharing with us a little bit, some about your role, and then a bit about why you do the work that you do in relation to inclusivity in journalism?
Absolutely. So right now I am the 5 p.m. anchor here at Denver 7, but I'm also our social equity reporter. So even though I anchor a newscast every day, I'm also out in the community almost every single day telling a story about an underrepresented community. Social equity reporter. I know a lot of times when I say that, people wonder what I kind of think I know what it is, but what exactly is that? And basically, it really is just telling a story about our society and maybe an inequity that's happening or just an underserved community that's facing some sort of challenge. It's not always issue based. It's also just highlighting the good happening in underserved communities and with people who are underserved. So it encompasses a lot. But to really talk about how this started for me, we have to go back to the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And that's when my news director, the leader of our whole newsroom, went to each reporter and said, I need you to pick a beat and I need you to own that beat. And it can be any beat, but pick it, own it. We're starting next week. So I really started to think about it because, as Marcus said, I didn't really want to do crime. Crime gets old. You do it for a while and you feel like you're a part of the problem. Important beat, but it just wasn't for me. I thought about politics. I'm really interested in politics, but that was another one where I was like, I'm not sure that my talent is best suited for covering that beat. And the more I thought about it, I thought, what about race and culture? I loved that, but I didn't like the title because I think it was too limiting for me. And I fleshed it out more and I thought social equity. Because when we talk about underrepresented communities, a lot of your minds probably went directly to race, right? It's natural, it happens. But it's so much more than that. I wanted to do reporting that was so much more than that. And so I went to my news director and I said, I want to do social equity reporting. I want to highlight what's going on in underserved communities. And she said, can you do a story about that every day? Is that an everyday thing? And I said, well, give me the opportunity. I think it is. And a month after that, she was blown away because for me, social equity was about, I mean, in Colorado, cannabis, right? Cannabis was legalized. We have so many issues stemming from that. It was about veterans who are experiencing homelessness. That's a social equity issue. It was about moms just trying to find childcare. In Denver, we have very few options for childcare, and those with the most money typically get the childcare they're looking for, and those without money don't get it. And so it's been, oh my gosh, 4 years of this beat, and it's transformed and evolved, and it's taught me a lot. I love what I do, and I love that I was able to kind of think outside the box myself in terms of what this beat means and how it can contribute to a more inclusive society, but also it contributed to a more inclusive newsroom in terms of the stories that we tell and the stories that we brush off. So that's me.
No, that's excellent. And I really hinge on that piece when you said, news isn't just telling the bad things that happen in the community, it's also informing people of the good, of the amazing things that people are doing to restore their communities. And I'm really interested in hearing more about that as we get further into the discussion. Moving right along, Nathaniel, do you mind unmuting yourself and telling us about your work and the reason why you're in the field that you're in?
Absolutely. So I am the congressional correspondent for Scripps News. So a big part of what I do every single day is chase senators and representatives around the U.S. Capitol. It's a lot of logistics. It's a lot of trying to track people down. Like, oh my God, what meeting are they in? Where can I find them? Is it outside this door? Is it outside this door? Oh, I picked the wrong door. I don't have them. So it's a lot of that. I've been doing that pretty much for the last 3.5 or so years. I came to Scripps knowing that I really wanted to cover politics. That was a big goal of mine. And so I kind of took that leap. And I think one of the things that's difficult about covering politics, and this is something I've talked with other journalists about, my colleagues, et cetera, is it's very hard, and I struggle with this too, and I think everyone does, to check your own personal opinions at the door, because pretty much every person in this country who votes, which is, many of us, not all of us, pretty much every person in this country has a preconceived notion of what they view as right, what they view as wrong, what they want to advance. And so being able to check your assumptions or your expectations at the door is difficult. And I think in a highly polarized environment where, sometimes asking certain questions can be viewed as a sign of certain political biases, it's really something that I've had to juggle. And, one of the difficult things for me, or one of the things that could have been difficult going to this job, I am an openly gay man. Outside of work, I am the executive director. I'm the head of the Scripps Pride ERG, which I co-lead with the head of Scripps HR as well, based in Cincinnati. So we're kind of all across the country. And I think one of the difficult things is, I cover politicians every single day. There's still a number of conservative Republicans who've made very clear that they don't really believe in gay marriage or think that the courts had got it wrong in that sense. And I've occasionally covered the Supreme Court is there as well and backfilled there. So, it kind of gives you this sense of, there's this battle kind of ongoing in your head of like, how do I check my own personal beliefs at the door and not ask questions that will, give, the viewer or give, the member I'm talking to any sense of bias. And so I think that's asking very specific, very concrete questions. Oh, you don't believe in, gay marriage? Why? I mean, putting people up to the task of answering those specific questions. And I think that we do our viewers a massive disservice if, especially in political reporting, I mean, specifically political reporting, showing that there's any sort of bias. And I think that there is such a wide gap in this country of what different people believe in. And so, my goal every day is to give every lawmaker I talk to a fair shake, feel like they are able to say their piece. I'm not being critical of what they're saying. I don't have to agree with it. There are plenty of times I've gone home and I turn to my partner and I'm like, you would not believe what this person said to me today. It's like absolutely insane. But at the same time, learning to kind of check that at the door and understand that, I can, lead this life. It's not a dual life. I by no means hide my personality in any way. I'm wearing, rainbow socks on Pride Month, under my suit. But that being said, I think combating those biases, combating um, the desire to kind of, get upset about things is really difficult. And that's something that I think I've struggled with. And I've tried to help anyone I work with on is the ability to not necessarily bifurcate yourself, be able to walk into something and say, okay, if someone is thinking about this from an entirely different angle, if someone believes my relationship doesn't exist, I want to get to the bottom of why they believe that. Where is the root of that belief? And make that clear to the viewer. This is what this person believes, and this is why, and allow them to reach their own, reasoning or their own decision on what they want to believe in or what they want to vote for on their own. I think, telling people what to believe or telling people what to think is something I don't love in news. I've started my career at working at MSNBC, which is, a good portion of their programming is opinion television. And there was kind of that internal wrestle sometimes of, anchors telling people what to be upset about or what to, get worked up about. And I think that a lot of networks kind of do that. And so I think the biggest service I can do to the viewer, and this is a message I've told plenty of other reporters as well, is making clear that I am not judging the viewer. I want the viewer to understand what XYZ politician thinks and understand why they think it and allow them to reach their own reasoning for why for what they believe and what they want to believe and what they want to vote for. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that I wrestle with, and one of the things that kind of excites me about my job is being able to make sense of some things that are sometimes so unbelievably, polarizing, but put that in a really concise package and say, hey, this person thinks this person thinks that. You're allowed to reach your own opinion. And so that's kind of what I strive to do every day. And it's certainly been a lot of fun. Capitol Hill, if anyone's been following the news in the past 6 weeks, has been constant turmoil.
Yes, it has very complicated and polarizing time in our country for sure. But thank you so much, Nathaniel, for setting the stage to really, I think one of the themes of today's programming is that journalists are people too, right? And I love that I can't wait to hear more about how you bring your full authentic self to your work and how that might influence and inspire some of the work that you do. Moving right along to our last guest, last but definitely not least, Andres, do you mind sharing with us more about your role in the work that you do, and then why inclusivity in journalism is important to you?
Tony, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited of being able to have this conversation with you and great guests. I mean, part of our company joining me as well. So let me tell a little bit about my story. I'm originally from Colombia. I moved to the US almost 25 years ago. And I started as an account executive at a television station, Spanish language television station in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But from there, then I started growing and really understanding dynamics of the US culture. And then understanding that I was a Latino in a different country as well. And that I needed to understand those dynamics, that I was actually bringing my own culture, but understanding as well that there was another culture that I needed it to understand. So with that, I moved to different markets, including Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Denver, Miami now. And that has given me the opportunity to understand that is so key for us as broadcasters and journalists. Yeah, to put into practice the cultural competence is to understand our communities really well in order to really serve them. Because at the end of the day, that's our job. That's what we need. That's what we're here for, is to serve them. Each one of us in different roles. And as the general manager of an English language TV station in Miami, where we have a great concentration of those in those communities are Hispanic Latinos. They consider themselves. So imagine how interesting is that dynamic, a Latino leading an English language television station. So, uh, Marcus, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. So it's very interesting. So moving from one market to another one has allowed me to understand those dynamics about the political environment, composition of demographics, that Hispanic Latinos, talking about Hispanic Latinos, they're not monolithic. They come from different countries. We come from different countries, different cultures as well. Maybe one word that we say in Spanish is okay in Colombia, but it doesn't mean or it doesn't resonate well in Mexico. So we have to be so careful as well. And with that, our responsibility is to go very into our local communities, talk to them, listen to them, and understand their needs as well. Understand as well what is it that we're doing right, what is it that we're doing wrong. How can we help them? As a general manager, I have the opportunity to go and talk to chambers of commerce, not-for-profit organizations, uh, sometimes political leaders as well. So we need to ask the right questions, but more importantly, we need to listen, because I think that's the key. Is when we listen, uh, is we're going to be able to really serve them correctly, because there's so much noise out there that sometimes our communities are just saying, I mean, it's enough of this news. So we want to become that source of information for them that they can trust. That is not only something that is negative, but it's something that is going to empower their lives. Provided them with that information about services that are going to help their kids, about jobs, about training. I mean, some of our kids, they need to know as well that there's a lot of areas in which they can apply for a grant or a scholarship, and they can get that information through us. We need to continue building that rapport and that channel with our communities by providing them with that information, because news is about everything. And I always say the news belongs to all of us, not just to one set. I'm excited being here, so looking forward to sharing more of this content and then listening to everyone that's too.
Thank you so much for that, Andres. I mean, one of the things that I've become privy to in my time working in news literacy is just the amount of misinformation and disinformation that are disproportionately affecting Black and Brown communities, which might affect some of their relationships or their views towards media in general, especially news media. So I'm really excited to hear about some of the conversations that you've had with people in Spanish-speaking countries, or some of your audience members who may have reached out about some of the coverage issues that they have seen. So super excited to hear more about everything that everybody is doing. But first, let's start with Marcus. I want to know more about this work that you've done with around representation. The news media, as we know, has not always been great about representation, and hasn't always done well in the eyes of its audience representing them. Scripps has
Sure.
done some research around this and has embarked on initiatives to help address this. Can you share more information about that work that you're doing, and how are you all approaching this issue differently?
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's safe to say that our company has done more than any other to learn more about our audience, literally millions of dollars that we put into audience research. And just for the people on the call, I want you to think about if you ever travel to a different city and you pop on the local news, do you ever notice that it generally kind of looks the same? The format is the same, the way the anchors talk, the graphics, the same setup for stories, weather, breaking news, the placement of the sports segment. And that's because a lot of companies use the same consulting companies who are giving everybody the same advice. And what you end up with is a whole sea of sameness. And audiences are tired of that. And it's no secret that less people are watching local TV than they ever have before. So when our company set out to do our research, we knew we had to do something differently. So we didn't use those same old consulting companies. We found a company called Seek that's based out of Cincinnati. Seek is a marketing research company that takes an empathic approach to its research, actually talking to people one-on-one instead of in personal surveys. And that's how we approached our audience research. If you want to show the next slide, please. And these are some of the photos of some of the people that we spoke to in our studies. We've done research on rural communities who told us they don't feel seen or represented accurately in the local news. We wanted to learn more about Hispanic communities as well. As Andre said, the fastest growing demographic in the country, but a demographic that is often viewed as a monolith. And here's the thing, I'm not Hispanic, in case you haven't noticed, but I was able to tap people like Andres, who helped me with the research and the training with that. Nate has helped with LGBTQ issues, and I'm able to tap people like Micah who are on the ground in a newsroom as we're doing this training. But our first study was with Black and African American viewers, which we felt was an important place to start. The Black population actually over-indexes when you compare it to how many people watch local news, meaning a higher share of the Black population consume our product, which is why we felt it was important to learn more, because there's a feeling that there was also a large amount of distrust in the media in the Black population. Our studies wanted to get to the heart of that. And we heard in very raw detail how our Black viewers don't see positive portrayals of themselves on the news, that good stories more often than not portray white people. And how the Black people that they knew, doctors, lawyers, professional people, that's the people that they know, but the portrayals that they see on the news were mostly negative. And that the only reason local news went into their communities was when bad things were happening. So we took these findings back to our local newsrooms, which is a very hard thing to hear, because our news employees, they don't go out of their way on an everyday basis to purposely discriminate against people. But because of the way that we do our jobs, the systems and structures that we traditionally set up, the speed and the deadline pressure that we work under often puts news stations in a position that gets in the way of good, inclusive decision making. Next slide, please. So I want to show you some of the slides that we use with our newsroom employees to get them to start thinking differently about coverage. These are real examples taken from stations across the country, albeit not Scripps stations. This is an example of two stories that ran on an Illinois TV station website a few years ago. Same crime, burglary, same day, same reporter writing the story. And trust me, that station heard about this from their viewers. The difference between the two stories were obvious. And viewers were asking, why are the white kids presented in suits and ties and the Black suspects in mugshots? What message does that send to the viewer when you do it? Now, as it turned out, the reason this happened was because the crimes happened in different counties. One county makes mugshots available right away, but the other one doesn't. But at the end of the day, the viewer doesn't care. They don't see that. All they see is the representation, and they're allowed to come to their own conclusions. So that's why at our company, in our newsrooms, we've decided to put mugshot policies in all of our newsrooms to make sure that we have a consistent approach to when and where we use mugshots. And generally, the conversation starts with, we don't, except in certain circumstances. If it's a public figure, or there's a public safety issue or a major crime, but the conversation always starts with no. Next slide, please. And then there's these situations. So as you look at these two mugshots, ask yourself, who did the killing and who was killed? Because you can't tell when you look at that. The gentleman on the left broke into Mr. Edwards' home and shot him as he was making breakfast for his kids. But you wouldn't know that by looking at these images on the screen. Green Bay police sent the mugshots to the local stations, and the stations probably don't think twice about just throwing them on the air. Mr. Edwards had obviously been in trouble before, but the truth of the matter is victims deserve justice too, and respect. And using a mugshot to identify a victim victimizes that person all over again. Next slide, please. Or sometimes this happens. Nia Wilson was murdered in 2018 at an Oakland train station. A guy kind of randomly came up behind her and stabbed her for no reason. The local station found this photo of Nia on her social media and aired it. And as you can imagine, that station's social media and their phones blew up saying, "You're victimizing the victim all over again. You're making her look like a gangster," somehow suggesting that she deserved to die. And the station admitted that it took them 3 minutes to find that photo. Next slide, please. And another 3 minutes to find this one. You see, because even if nobody was trying to make Nia Wilson look like a gangster who deserved to die, the fact is they did. So we teach our newsroom employees to be conscious about how we portray victims of crime, not only because it's the right thing to do, but with the voice that social media gives our audiences. They're watching, they're calling you out. So in conclusion, I just want to say that along with our mugshot policies, we also have diversity committees in our newsrooms, a diversity Rolodex to ensure that we're intentional about the people that we portray in our stories, that we're not just showcasing minorities as criminals, and a system where people who have had stories written about them or mugshots published on our digital platforms back in a time when we didn't have these policies in place can petition to get those removed. We believe that all of these things go hand in hand with being a good steward of the community, and that is the responsibility of a local TV station.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I learned a lot about the ways that people are feeling about the news. And what you shared among, I think a lot of it comes down to minimizing harm, right? That important journalism principle, minimizing harm. It's a lot of what you said really comes down to focusing on that, right? To having infrastructure and systems in place to cause as least harm as possible. So I really love what you had to say. And I think something else to pull out of that is the diversity index, right? You guys are thinking critically about the sources, who you're talking to for stories, right? Considering community in these stories and centering them, I think is really smart and really innovative work. So kudos to that. And thank you for sharing that.
Thank
And
you.
so now, as we look inward on, we see the work that's happening on, systemic level, the change that's happening due to research and the efforts of people collaboratively working to change the system. Let's shift gears to what is going on internally when you guys are doing the work. Each of you sit on and lead groups within Scripps focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. But what do these terms mean to you? And why is it important that media organizations really look inward and think about their own issues as they're addressing, and covering societal issues? And we'll start this time with Andres.
For me, EDI is, first of all, I'm part of the ERG group as well. We need us. I'm the co-chair for this great group. And when we are in a market where if we understand precisely the demographics, the composition of the demographics, political environment, and all the other elements that really are part of the culture, because the culture is defined by who are there, not so much by who is doing the research. Is the composition, is all those elements, and then we need to learn about the culture. And then when we understand the culture, then EDIs is really important. For example, inclusion, an English language TV station. We need to understand as well that we need to reach out as well to the bilingual community. We cannot just say we are only catering to the English language consumer. We need to understand as well, how can we talk to the Hispanic Latino who doesn't speak English as well, but they need our support too. There's other outlets, of course, there's other outlets of information, but we need to do our portion as well. And by not doing it, we're not being inclusive. We're not being really inclusive as well. We're not showcasing that we're very diverse as well in our newsrooms, in our organizations. And that when we walk into a room, people feel that they are being represented by someone who they trust, not necessarily because of the color of your skin or the gender. It's about that you understood me, regardless of your culture. So I think that that's where we can make a huge difference, and we've made a lot of mistakes too. Because one of the first steps is always understanding what is it that we've done wrong. And maybe if we all take that step, which Scripps is doing a phenomenal job, and I applaud Marcus and as well Nathaniel and then Micah, because we are all really putting a lot of efforts into making this a priority for the company. It goes from the corporate level all the way down to local stations. We're creating segments, for example, in our live trial shows that instead of doing so much pay to play segments, we're doing segments about not-for-profit organizations. And emails are starting to come in asking, these not-for-profit organizations are obtaining resources through donors as well, because suddenly they were featured in our segment. So we need to understand that by connecting communities, we become part of the solution. Communities are so amazing and so smart that all they need is for us to help them connect each other, facilitating, becoming the bridge. And by doing so, then it facilitates our job as well. It allows us to do our job in an easier way. So that's what I love about EDI, and that's what I love about learning so much about it. I think that again, I go back to listening. Listening builds trust.
Absolutely. No, if you want to repair relationships with communities that have felt harmed, or have some distrust towards the media, it starts with listening to them. It starts with including them in these conversations. Excellent point, Andres. Micah, do you mind sharing what EDI means to you and the efforts that you're doing to improve things in your newsroom?
Absolutely. I think to talk about EDI for me, EDI holistically is a concept, but I think we have to break that out and talk about each word. Diversity really is, it's who you are. It's who I am. That is what diversity is. And I think inclusion is making sure that everyone's voice is heard, right? Equity is making sure that everyone's voice holds the same amount of weight. And I wrote something down earlier. It says, when we've achieved equity, that means identity is not predictive of opportunity. And so I just wanted to kind of lay that out because I think EDI is such an important, again, concept, but we use that and we don't really think about what each individual word means. Here at Denver 7, I am the EDI committee lead. So I actually launched our committee and started it. And a couple of things that I helped implement to try to further our inclusion and especially equity goals is we started doing lunch and learns. So once a month, we bring in a community group, whether that be a nonprofit, a chamber of commerce, to come in, tell us about what they're doing. And we usually provide lunch from a local restaurant, bakery, whoever's nearby. And that's usually a hit. Anytime there's food involved, that's going to be a high attendance event. Marcus mentioned a Rolodex. We actually launched what we call a diverse experts list, where we just, anytime we believe someone has a diverse perspective, we put them on a list. And so when someone says, hey, I need a doctor, for instance, when we were in the height of COVID, there was a time where we had a whole day of doctors that were men, not one woman. And so we looked at ourselves and we said, how do we rectify this? So we do have a list that our reporters, producers, anybody can reference when you're looking for someone from a diverse background. The third thing that is really my baby that I love is that we do newscast audits for EDI. So every quarter we pick a random newscast. It can be from the morning, midday, or evening, and we audit it for diversity. Have we gone an entire 15 minutes of a newscast and not heard from a woman? Have we done a story about disabilities and not talked to somebody with a disability? Did we do a crime story and show mugshots when we didn't need to? And so that's really the accountability piece that we felt was needed to make sure that we were striving toward our goals. And so I'm seeing all the chat. Thank you, everybody. But all of those things, I feel, again, sometimes I think when we talk about EDI, it can be so serious and heavy. And it is serious. It's a very serious thing. But I think we have a nice balance now. We have the lunch and learns where we have that camaraderie. We get together. We get to meet outside groups. We get to have lunch together. We have our diverse experts list, which is practical. It's right there for us every single day, anytime you need it. And then we have the accountability piece with the newscast audit. So those are some of the things that we're working on, and that's really what EDI means to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing everything, all the work that you're doing. And I'm also a part of NABJ as well. I saw that in your bio. Love NABJ. Great group. I think it's like the biggest affiliated group of journalists in the country. So thank you for the work that you're doing in that lane as well. Nate, to round us off as we get into our audience questions, what does EDI mean to you, and how do you implement it in the work that you do?
I think one of the things that everyone's touched on so far, especially Micah, Marcus, and Andres, is kind of diversity, and I think diversity of support. I mean, I'm in an interesting place here, and in a weird way, I think COVID, in some senses, has helped us connect across the country. I mean, I'm in a weird sense of like I'm on Capitol Hill, but I'm pretty much the only Scripps employee who's regularly on Capitol Hill. So for me, it's about reaching across the country, leveraging the diversity of our membership in the Pride ERG to be able to talk to any employee across the company or the country. I think that there are certain levels of organization. People like to think of, companies like, oh, I can reach out to my boss, but their boss is off limits, or this person who reports to a different person all the way across the country is off limits. I think those limits in some ways have faded away. And so I found a lot of solace and a lot of ability to teach and learn and have teachable moments and look for advice by being able to reach across the country using the members of our Pride ERG as a resource, and other company leaders as a resource as well. And as educators being part of this news literacy project today, you're all across the country, and you all have the ability to go ahead and reach out to someone and say, you talk to people in a more conservative area, you actually live in a more liberal area. How do you balance these tough questions that we wrestle with? So being able to, I'm being mindful of time here, but being able to rely on each other, being able to work together and know that everyone's there for each other, I think is a huge part of equity, diversity, and inclusion for me. And I mean, geographic diversity, I think, is a huge thing today, given that we are just so across the country. We are all in different places, but we're able to connect with a system like this where we can all get together. And even if we might work alone in our own bucket, teaching one thing or working on one thing, reporting on one thing in one place, there is someone else across the country. You should not be afraid to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I need help. How do you deal with this in your daily life?
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I want to get to a couple of audience questions. We're a little bit over time. Is it cool? Is it okay if you guys stick around for just 2 questions? Awesome. Thank you so much. The first one, I think this is a question more for Andres or Marcus. How do you prove unintentional errors or perceptions to your audience? What work goes into showing that an error was unintentional?
I think the most important thing is being as transparent as possible. Admit when you make mistakes. And I don't think we as local news have always done a good job of that. When we make a mistake, we hope nobody really noticed and kind of sweep it under the rug. I think our communities are forgiving of the mistakes that we make, because we do make mistakes. And we have had Scripps stations that have posted examples like I've seen, or things like that. And it's important to say, hey, that's not what we meant to. We unintentionally, we're not thinking about that when we posted this. Here is what we're doing to rectify that. And I think people are forgiving of that. So I think it's important that you're just transparent about your approach, that you're trying to do the right thing.
Andres, do you have anything else to add?
No, Marcus really said it so eloquently. The one thing that I just had to, say it as to add to it is, as long as we can show precisely that we made that mistake, but more importantly is to learn from it and to implement processes, workflows, and policies that will prevent those mistakes to continue happening. Mistakes will happen, will always, but at least we have something in place that we can follow and prevent for those mistakes to happen. Because that's the last thing that I'm gonna say Nathaniel or Micah want to do is to make those mistakes. I don't want to make those mistakes. Neither is Marcus. So it's just we're learning as well, and this is the opportunity for us to, again, like bring this back to coming together, listening to each other, and then we will listen more, and that way we can put more or develop more of these policies.
Excellent. And then for the final questions, really quick, I think that this question is best for Nathaniel and Micah. At what point is there a perceived overemphasis on diversity that might lead to backlash from the majority?
I'll try to jump in here. I'll be honest. This is open and honest. We're there. We're already seeing a little bit of a backlash to the diversity conversation. And that's why, for me, I always want to emphasize all of us are diverse. Diversity is not just race, it is not just sexual orientation or identity. It's literally all of us. And in some ways, we can't combat that. Some ways people have made up their minds, and we have to accept that. But also, if we're doing our jobs and making sure that everyone can see themselves in our coverage, in our storytelling, in our newscasts, the backlash will fade away. I just think that the word diversity has become a trigger point for a lot of people in general, and that is hard to combat.
Excellent.
Absolutely. And to touch on that point, sorry, my internet got wonky there for a second. I think a big part of what I do is just giving that transparency to the viewer, saying, this is why I'm talking to this person. Not necessarily, I'm talking to them because they're diverse, but I'm talking to them because they are a leader in XYZ community, or they run this nonprofit, or they have a, significant interest. They're a former congressional staffer, giving the full context of why someone matters to a story. So that, when someone's listening, they don't just go, why would they pick this person? It's more of a, we pick this person because this is the person who can best answer this question, who can best take their learned, lived experience and make it make sense for the people watching at home. So not being afraid to just be a little bit transparent and say, hey, we chose this person because they run a nonprofit, or because they have a vested interest, or because they were a staffer for a very long time, or they live this certain experience. And so being able to say that, be transparent with people. And I think when you have that transparency, that develops a level of trust between you and the viewer that isn't palpable, because obviously you can't see the viewer, but the viewer at least knows where you're coming from, what you're trying to get them to understand, as opposed to just feeling like, the news is talking at me. They're not talking to me or with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know we stayed over a little bit over time, but thank you so much for answering the questions. This has been extremely enlightening, and I learned a lot, even as a journalist. Before we let you go today, I wanted to share my screen so that you all can get access to our lovely survey, where once you complete it, you'll be able to get access to your certificate of attendance. All you have to do is scan the QR code. The link to the survey is also in the chat. Thank you for joining us. We have a few awesome programming left for the NewsLitCamp today. So I'm excited for that. A recording of this session will be available in a follow-up email next week. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. And to our amazing hosts, thank you for the amazing insight. And I look forward to all the amazing things that you guys continue to do in your career. Thank you so much, everybody. See you soon.